Jeff. Sarah Jacobs too. She is not needed until 7.
Yep. All right. Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the City of Kalamazoo's 5 o'clock Committee of the Whole meeting for Monday, March 15th, 2021. Tonight's 5 o'clock meeting is being streamed live on the City of Kalamazoo's Facebook page and also on the City of Kalamazoo's YouTube channel. You can listen to the meeting if you need to by calling area code 269-552-6425 and entering meeting ID number 938-1545-4292 when prompted. And you can also leave a public comment for the 5 o'clock Committee of the Whole meeting by calling area code 269-226-6573. And tonight's meeting, I'll turn over to Mayor David Anderson.
Thank you, Deputy City Manager Jeff Chamberlain. Well, it's nice to see everybody again here after spending the day together at our workshop retreat on Saturday. And so here we are back at it again at the Monday, March 15th Committee of the Whole meeting. And I'm officially calling that meeting to order. Clerk Borling, will you please call the roll?
Commissioner Cunningham.
The great city of Kalamazoo.
Commissioner Hess.
Here in Kalamazoo.
Commissioner Knott.
Here, Kalamazoo.
Commissioner Pradle.
Present from the City of Kalamazoo.
Commissioner Urban.
Here in Kalamazoo.
Vice Mayor Griffin.
Here in Kalamazoo.
And Mayor Anderson.
Here in Kalamazoo. Thank you, Clerk Borling. I believe that the next item on our agenda, DCM Chamberlain, is an opportunity for public comments for the Committee of the Whole. Do we have any public comments?
There is one at this time. If you hold for me for one moment.
Okay.
Jeff Messer, city resident. These 100% virtual meetings are making at least one commissioner tired. They are eager and ready to resume some form of in-person meetings. I absolutely agree. I've repeatedly asked the commission for 8 months now, since July 2020, to reestablish meetings with the public present. I've suggested hybrid meetings, outdoor meetings in city parks, and limited attendance meetings. I asked the commission to have a discussion tonight about plans for resuming some form of in-person meeting. I asked Attorney Robinson to please inform the commission and public about the relevant restrictions that Governor Whitmer, via the State Department of Health, has placed on municipal meetings. Thank you.
And that is it.
Thank you so much. So on our special agenda items for the Committee of the Whole, we have something a little bit unusual this evening in that we have a motion for first reading, and that will be an action item, which we will not often have on our Committee of the Whole meeting. So at this point, I know we're going to have some discussion about it. Manager Ritzma, do you want to start that off? And at what time will the motion be appropriate?
Yeah, so thank you all. So we have a couple of items that we need to get done tonight. One is declaring a local state of emergency for the purpose of continuing virtual meetings past the March 31st date, and leaving it open till, Rich, I'm not sure, did it go to 6 months or the end of the year?
It goes until August.
August, okay.
2021.
So that's item number one. The second piece is creating our own emergency operations center. And so in other terms, we are going to be separating from the county's emergency operations center and become our own center, whereby we can directly deal with the state and also receive resources directly in the event of an emergency. So those are the two items that we have this evening. And Rich, do you want to add anything, or Jeff, or do you want to go to questions and answers or discussion?
Well,
Mayor.
Well, I can add something, just briefly. And good evening, commissioners. Normally you don't see my face up here. The city attorney had a family emergency, so I am stepping in his place. And so he wanted me to just give you a little background on the new ordinance, proposed ordinance, chapter 12. And it's pursuant to the Emergency Management Act, MCL 30.401. And basically what it allows you to do, like City Manager Richland says, allows you to declare a state of emergency. Also allows the city manager to appoint a emergency coordinator, and things like that. So basically, for the purposes of the Open Meetings Act, it allows you to extend the virtual meetings until August 31st of 2021. So if you have any more questions, I can answer those, hopefully. So
Questions from commissioners? Commissioner Urban?
Yes, well, I can see that we can continue the way we've been doing it until the end of August if we want. But if we want to do as Jeff Messer suggests or some modification of that, at what point can we begin to have hybrid meetings? In other words, is this declaration going to the end of August? Is that prescriptive or is it permissive?
You, per the ordinance, the city commission has control of what it wants to do as far as if it wants to rescind that, it can. And meet hybrid or in person if you so inclined to do.
Well, I'm hoping that in a few months, maybe by July 4th, we could go to at least to hybrid meetings. I'd like to be able to tell our constituents that we're not wedded to this form of communication until the end of August.
Manager Ritzma?
Yeah, Commissioner Urban, right now the restriction on being able to meet in person or not is dependent on the crowd size that can be allowed indoors. And presently it's at 25. So it's really difficult to have a meeting with a limit of 25 individuals when you include commission staff. And so right now that restriction is making it difficult to meet in person, but presumably those restrictions will be eased up between now and August. So we'll just keep monitoring that, and definitely hybrid meetings can become an interim step before we go full blown into in-person meetings.
Well, if I may say, 25, that's, I can understand maybe that's a pretty strict limitation. But if we should go to 50, we rarely have 50 people there. And I think we have ways of handling overflow like we have in the past. I'm sympathetic to the request. And I just think we ought to be ready to move to hybrid meetings as soon as it's possible.
Any other questions for staff on this? Yeah, Commissioner Pradel.
No, we've received a few emails from the Michigan Municipal League, MML, suggesting that individuals reach out to their state representatives and senators to, effectively share our stance on whether or not the legislature should take action to extend the ability to hold virtual meetings. So do you have any sense, have you heard any more about whether you think this is making any headway in the legislature, whether it's likely that they're going to extend it? And then also just what implications if we were to vote on this tonight and then the legislature does step in and extend things. I'm just curious if you'd mind sharing that as well.
So I can touch on that briefly. Clyde, before when I talked to him earlier today, he said there's 3 bills right now in the state legislature. He's not confident that those would be passed. So that's why he recommended to do this fix until hopefully they do act. And if they do act, then of course, then we can revisit this. You as a body can revisit this. But as of right now, just to be for safety purposes, and as City Manager Ritzema just stated, that you can't have a lot of people indoors right now anyway. So for right now, this is the best recommended fix for our current situation.
Other questions? I'm sorry, Chris.
Sorry, I just had one more question as well. Well, actually, I have one for you, Mayor. So are we going to have an opportunity to discuss this after questions?
Yeah, I want a motion, then we
Okay.
can have discussion. Yeah.
Great. So my second question is, in terms of, what other municipalities are doing, are we, alone in a sea of other municipalities that are coming back in person? Or, I have to believe that if Michigan Municipal League is encouraging local elected leaders to reach out, that there is, similar interest from other municipalities to extend the virtual timeline. But I'm just curious if you have any sense about, what other communities are doing of our size or larger, in the state.
I believe Ann Arbor, where Attorney Robinson got the model for our ordinance. I think Ann Arbor and maybe even Grand Rapids are trying something similar. So I don't think we're alone on that. So,
And I know Battle Creek is meeting virtually in the county.
Any other questions for staff on this? Yeah, Commissioner Hess.
I'm just wondering what it would look like if we had a hybrid meeting. Would some people be on the screen and other people be around the dais? Or I'd be interested to know how then we would take public comment. Would we take it in person and virtually? Just questions for the techies out there.
If I could try to answer that. We also have to remember too, we're not talking about just a city commission. We're talking our boards and commissions too. So that's why we're having conversations, as the city manager said, with the other cities in the state of Michigan to answer a lot of those techie type questions. So that questions and scenarios of what if part of the board is there, but part of the board is virtual? How does public input work? So those are all questions that all the communities are struggling with right now. But we're talking together as communities to come up with solutions.
right. And I just got a phone call not too long ago from a local attorney who represents the public library, which is in the city's jurisdiction, and they're struggling with this too. And so they wanted to see our ordinance and see if it would apply to the city. And you do have jurisdiction for the way it's written. I didn't ask Clyde this, but the way my interpretation of how it's written, it does extend to the city and any public body that's within the city that is under the Open Meetings Act. So just to keep that in mind as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Any other questions? Well, at this point, then we have, we need a motion to have a first reading of an ordinance to be adopted as an emergency measure to amend Chapter 12 of the Kalamazoo City Code to set forth emergency management protocols and permit the City Commission and other public bodies of the city, which are subject to the Open Meetings Act, to continue to meet by electronic means. So is there a motion to offer for first reading?
So moved.
Motion made by
Support.
Commissioner Cunningham, supported by Commissioner, sorry, I missed that. Commissioner Cunningham.
I think as far as the hybrid, I would advise staff to, start really looking into what that process is so we can iron it out as best as possible. We don't want to run into some of the issues we ran into when we first went into strictly online. But I say that to say, I think going outdoors is a really good opportunity. And I think we should do that as soon as weather permits. Maybe even once a month, or we possibly probably do twice a month for our meetings per se. I'm not sure about the other boards. I think that should be board by board decision, but I would, as far as my opinions and thoughts, I think that would be a good opportunity to start that up and do it regularly until things get back to normal.
Yeah, Manager Ritzman.
To Commissioner Cunningham's point, we do own a large tent now, so we can be able to move that around and set that up for these meetings.
Commissioner Pradel.
Yeah, I got some pretty strong feelings about this, so please excuse me for the length I'm going to go at here, but going to go over the numbers again. 535,000 people dead in the United States, 16,759 people dead in the state of Michigan, 324 people dead in Kalamazoo County. Now, I think back to the instance of where, 7 cyclists were plowed down by a car. I think back to the Uber shooter and the fear and the concern over that. And to think that there are over 5 times the entire size and volume of Michigan's football stadium who have died in the United States, and that somehow, we are, comfortable with putting people whose circumstances we don't even fully understand at risk. The thing with HIPAA and all of the people who work for the city of Kalamazoo who we're asking to show up for work and report, whether it be ourselves, whether it be the people that we have to come and, be part of the meetings or to provide public comments in the meetings. We don't know each other's pre-existing health conditions. We don't know, what pre-existing conditions or higher risk categories that people who are on staff that we're asking to show up and report for could impact, not to mention if it's not even those individuals, the immediate family members of those individuals. I know personally that there are a number of people in senior level administration with the city and probably with us as well that have lost people due to COVID. And I feel like if we have it within our ability to, contain and be cautious, I think we should do everything in our power to try to hold off as long as we possibly can, at least till things stabilize or are, a significantly reduced threat where we can space and feel comfortable about it. The thing that, in terms of Mr. Messer's calls, I very much appreciate where he's coming from, but I think there's somehow this mentality that we're like, somehow loving and enjoying being in this like isolar, like ivory tower of this, dark office room that I'm in of my wife's right now, and love being behind a screen where I'm protected. To be honest with you, as a new commissioner, I hate this. I really do. I miss seeing everybody. I miss being able to, hug people and, find out what everybody's doing on city staff and have that face-to-face interaction. If there's anything in this world I could do to get out of this screen and be back up on the dais where we could look people in the face and look each other in the face, I would 100% do it. But I think that the misconception as well is that somehow we're disenfranchising people who now can't show up in person. Well, again, for that argument, what about the people who are afraid to come to meetings because they're afraid of an overabundant population of people in a room? What about seniors or people who are at a high risk who might say to themselves, man, I really feel strongly about the fact that this zoning is going to change the way my neighborhood works, but I'm not going to show up because I'm afraid I could catch COVID. What about those people? Don't those people have rights to, express their views and be a part of a public meeting? I think the answer is yes. And I think that there are actually far more people in this community who would choose to opt out of public participation than the people who would opt to show up and cram themselves in a little sardine box to express their views. And I'll share this last point as well. I can't speak that much because I've only been a commissioner for a year and some change. But I will tell you one thing, the difference between community engagement, the level of emails we received, and public comment. I mean, we had one commission meeting, we had to split into 2 meetings because there were so much public comments. And we have seen an unparalleled amount of public engagement on issues. I mean, meetings where we've had 70 plus people line up to make comments. And the thing is they don't have to wait. They can just leave the message. Before they'd have to stand in a hot room for sometimes hours to make their voice heard, but now they can sit and record something on a phone and walk away and have us be the ones who have to stick around to listen to it. And, I don't buy that rationale, and I struggle with it. And I understand where people's impatience is coming from and wanting to come back in person together. But I think that if we have an opportunity to extend it even a few more months, if that's what it takes, I think we should absolutely positively do everything in our power to do it. And, I don't know who we're keeping safe in the process, but I know that we're keeping people safe in the process. And when we lifted up our hand and swore to, live up to the charter and the U.S. Constitution, that included the health and safety of the people we serve. And I think, by God, if that means staying virtual to keep people safe, even if they don't care about their own safety, I care about their safety. And so that's how I feel. And I apologize for going on at length about this, but it's something I feel pretty strongly about.
Thank you, Commissioner Pradel. Commissioner Knott.
I'll start by thanking Chris. Thank you for being brave to say exactly what I've been thinking and saying privately to people for the last, several months. As this caller calls in and talks about, getting us back out there, everything that you said, I support 100%. And to the fact you a minute ago made a comment about enjoying it in the comfort of my dining room. I don't know if you saw my camera flicker on and off, but my partner came home and we joined the masses and got a COVID puppy, right? Which seemed like a good idea, which comes with all sorts of challenges. And of course, the puppy had pulled down some stuff, which caused a commotion. If I was at City Hall, I wouldn't have to deal with this BS to participate in this meeting. But that's just when you're trying to balance, and I know we're all doing it, being at home and sharing the space with kids or with partners, etc. So there's that point. There's also the point of, I don't feel safe. I'm not going to get underneath a tent. We all were part of the tent experience when we went into community parks, and we recall the person that was in the tent smoking a cigar with all the mosquitoes. Not going to do it. It's just a few more months, and we're going to have higher percentages of those folks that are vaccinated, and that's when it makes sense. The other thing I will say, in my 9-to-5 job, we've at Equality Michigan seen an uptick in engagement and participation because we've had to go online. It's forced us to think about how do you reach out to your constituents and get people involved virtually. And I got to tell you, I'm seeing, as Chris mentioned, older people or people that just won't spend the time to come down to a meeting participating. And our engagement levels, from volunteering to commenting on legislation to some of the grassroots kind of lobby initiatives that we've been engaged in, have huge percentages of action in a way that we hadn't seen pre-pandemic. So I'm all for just sitting tight, keeping the community and the staff and all of the volunteers and ourselves safe, and coming back to meetings when it makes sense and when we have higher percentages of vaccinated community members.
Thank you, Commissioner Knott. Commissioner Urban?
Well, I appreciate what's been said here. I don't want to leave the impression that I'm eager to expose people. The ideal thing, in a way, is for us, through conversation with other municipalities and so forth, come up with a way to permanently have hybrid meetings that solve the problems that Commissioner Cunningham referred to. That would be ideal. But having said that, I just ask, is it appropriate for us to vote on something in committee of the whole meeting? I thought that one of the standing practices would be that we would vote on things like this, vote on anything at a regular meeting. Can we do that in our regular meeting and just have this time be time to discuss the issue? I just don't want to start a precedent that says we're going to vote on something at a committee of the whole meeting. We need to be rigorous, I think, in saying that there is nothing we're going to decide except at a regular business meeting, that you won't miss it if you are alert to those. So I just want to get a clarification on that.
So Commissioner Urban, this is on our business meeting agenda tonight,
Yes, yes.
this item. This is the motion for the first reading. So that's what this
but
is.
I'm
And
just
I agree
questioning-
with you, I don't disagree with your comments. Attorney Chair, do you want to make any comments about that?
Yeah, what we are offering, as you said, Mayor Anderson, is this is your first meeting or first to motion to offer for first reading. When we go to convene for the 7 o'clock, that's when you actually vote on the ordinance and make a determination whether or not to accept the ordinance as is, and also to pass a resolution for state of emergency right after that. So
You can vote to have a first reading, and then you can vote it down when it comes up,
correct.
actually as an ordinance. It doesn't commit you in any way, shape, or form just by having the first reading. That's just the process you need to have in
Right.
order for us to pass the ordinance.
And all we're-
I'm sorry.
And
Go
all
ahead.
we're trying to, I'm sorry to interrupt, but all we're trying to do is to get it, because it's March 15th, and the order or the statute is going to end at the end of the month. So we don't have another meeting unless you convene a special meeting. You don't have another meeting until the first week of April. So this is to allow us to be able to take action right away, because I think it's because that first meeting will not be virtual if you don't act on that today. So.
Manager Ritzman, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I was going to say what Rich just said. Plus, we do have, I think Clyde set committee of the whole meetings up where we can take action. So it is allowed. And for what Rich just said, with the deadline pending, we're left with very few options. So understand not making it precedent setting, but we also need to get things done too.
Commissioner Urban, did you want to say something more about that?
No, I understand now that I just think this is we have to watch about setting precedents, and I regard this situation as atypical. And as long as we recognize that in our record here, the reasons for doing the reason for doing this, I'll let it pass this time. Yeah.
Other discussion? Commissioner Cunningham.
I know I mentioned the outdoor meetings, but I just want to say thank you to Chris also for his statements, because everything that he stated was very true, very relevant, and I think very important, and more important than us gathering as soon as possible. Right now is not the time to do that. A, B, when it comes to the outdoor opportunity, I'm not opposed to it. So if I have colleagues who are, then stand behind them. And if we were to, I agree, Commissioner Knott. I'm not sure doing it under intent would be the way that I would want that to take place. So just want to follow back around.
Thank you, Commissioner Cunningham. Any other discussion? Clerk Borling, will you please call the roll?
Mayor, sorry, I forgot one other point I wrote down, if you mind sharing.
I'm sorry.
So the other thing too is about, again, this is coming from a person who managed events for a living and did a lot of large tents outside. So it's all great and dandy, but we live in the state of Michigan. And, how is public participation going to be when that thunderstorm rolls through, or it's down in rain, or it's in a park that isn't accessible to other parts of the city? So, I think we just have to keep in mind all those other things that in first brush, it might seem like it added ability for accessibility, but even if we take steps that we think are accessible, they might be removing other people from the process unintentionally. So I was just going to share that as well.
Sorry, I missed you, Commissioner Praedel. Clerk Borling, will you please call the roll?
Commissioner Hess,
Yes.
Commissioner Knott,
Yes.
Commissioner Praedel,
Yes.
Commissioner Urban,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Griffin,
Yes.
Mayor Anderson,
Yes.
Commissioner Cunningham.
Yes.
Thank you, Commissioners. The motion passes. Next on our agenda, we have a review of upcoming agenda items. Manager Ritzma?
I will turn things over to DCM Chamberlain.
Thank you. So just as a quick preview, we're not going to go over tonight's meeting too much. I think actually we talked about some of the regular agenda items that are on there tonight, but wanted to give you just a preview of some of the things coming up in the future. At the April meeting, we do have the analysis to impediments of fair housing. There'll be a resolution to set a public hearing. So there's a multi-step process for that document. And so we're going into the next step of that for that resolution. We did commit to making quarterly updates regarding odor control efforts. And in April, we'll be coming back again. And time is going by. And then also, we're going to be revising some language pertaining to the payments in lieu of taxes, or the pilots that are for the Creamery and the Harrison Circle. And again, these are all draft projects, so things may change in the next few weeks, but those are some of the major things. And of course, we have purchases and appointments and things like that that will come to your agendas. I know we are also been working with you all, and I know the city manager has met with the mayor and vice mayor to talk about specific work session topics. And so just wanted to thank you all for your ideas, input on that, and that's giving us the ability to put that into a calendar of topics that we can bring to you on a scheduled basis based on your input. So we're working those into a schedule. Don't know, city manager, if you want to say anything more about that, or
I can. So the mayor, vice mayor, and I met, and we kind of penciled out the ideas and topics that were, excuse me, I'm bringing up a sheet here on my monitor. So we were looking at following up with the topics that were, the 4 topics that were raised at the Saturday retreat: housing, economic development, public safety, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. So the first 4 cows, or the next 4 cows, beginning April 5th, will be presentations by staff. You remember the question came up, kind of where are we at with these topics as far as benchmarking, measurement, and so forth. So each of those will get a presentation of that area to help move into the other work that needs to be done of defining success and kind of plotting out strategies and tactics. So those will take us through the end of May. We also have planned a work session on stimulus funding, kind of what the parameters and restrictions are. Since we don't have that information yet, as soon as we do, we'll slot that into a committee of the whole or city commission meeting if needed, as that is obviously very important as well. So we've got the first 4 meetings, or the next 4 meetings of committee of the whole slated, and then there are other ideas that came up by commissioners, and we also have the remainder of the list of, I think there were 5 other areas that we didn't get to Saturday, so we could look at committee of the whole meetings to address those areas as well.
Thank you, Manager Ritzma. I appreciate that. So next we have a work session, and Manager Ritzma, do you want to kick that off?
Sure. So this goes back to when I began with the city, late 2013, 2014. The water contract between the city and the townships had expired, and we're trying to look at extending or renegotiating that contract. In April of 2014, we received notice of a lawsuit and by the townships against the city. And so out of that lawsuit came the idea of basically sitting down and negotiating between the parties. And we have a negotiating team that did that, including Clyde Robinson, Jeff Chamberlain, Steve Asensi, and Mike Ortega, who's outside counsel, and Bart Foster, who is our utility rate consultant. So I'm going to turn things over to Jeff, and he'll lay out kind of where we are, how we got here, and what the next steps are.
Okay. Thank you, City Manager. As he mentioned, this has been a long-term project that we've been working on, but it's brought us to this point tonight where the requested action is at your 7 o'clock meeting. But tonight, again, we wanted to just give you that background and give you some kind of the highlights of the contract, because this really is a new contract between the city of Kalamazoo and its neighboring townships that's intended to create a partnership for the next 40 years. So we want to go over those highlights, talk about some of those, how we got to where we are, and then also leave some time for some questions and answers too. I do want to just kind of, again, thank the team. I don't know if you mentioned James Baker was also a big member of that team, obviously. And then also Jennifer Clark, who's in our finance and accounting department, provided a lot of financial information that was shared, as well as Brianna Clausen, who is in the public services department, but she handles all the finance. So there's a lot of open data that was shared back and forth between the sides. And I also just kind of want to emphasize too of who we've been talking with here over the last several years. As the city manager mentioned, there was a lawsuit that was brought over the water contract. And there's been past suits. Actually, a lot of this goes beyond many of us who are here, lawsuits and settlements from 1988, 1998. But this one in particular was brought by, there were 8 communities involving water. And those are Comstock Township, Cooper Township, Kalamazoo Township, Oshtemo Township, Pavilion Township, Richland Township, Richland Village, and Texas Township. All of those communities have already taken this contract to their respective boards, and they have all approved this contract. We said that the city of Kalamazoo, like we do with many other contracts, is usually the last signator, and so that's why it's coming to you tonight. I do also just kind of want to point out and give a thanks to a couple township members that sat at the table with us for a lot of this work. There was a lot of good questions that went back and forth, but in particular, the supervisor of Oshtemo Charter Township, Libby Heine Cogswell, and then also Brett Paget, who's the Charter Township, the Comstock Charter Township Treasurer. So again, their questions, their insight, their data sharing back and forth was very helpful during this whole process. We did spend many hours at the table together. You can imagine that over 7 years, a lot of topics were discussed. And a lot of it too was building trust between the parties to show that the city of Kalamazoo wants to operate this as a regional system. And so as we went through these discussions, there were some key points that came out of it. One, that this be a 40-year agreement. And the idea being there that, we are, as a community and as a region, with the water system, we are interconnected. And we all need to make a commitment locally that we're going to stay as a partnership, as a commitment, that no one community is going to, in effect, break off and try to create a whole new water system on their own. But yet we need to operate in recognition of a regional partnership. Again, I keep using that phrase, but it truly is. Another key component, which we're going to talk a little bit more tonight, is this topic of rate equalization. We've discussed this at our past utility work sessions as we've talked about the budget with the city commission. So this is a component that we've been talking about here. But in the past, there was a differential between the city ratepayers and the township ratepayers, and that was actually a big part of the disagreement over how those would be set and who pays for what. But if we kept looking at this as a regional system, there's a recognition that different parts of the system are going to have different needs at different times. And those needs might be different in one neighborhood versus another neighborhood versus a city versus the township. But as a regional system, we would look at this, that we would share those costs and have those expenses be based on sound engineering and sound capital planning. Just to kind of give you an example of how that already works in our daily lives, that we just don't really pay attention to it, but it already works, is that when we as a city repair a street, let's say on East Main, the whole community absorbs that as part of the budget. Same thing when we repair a street in Bronson Boulevard, the whole community becomes part of the whole street budget. Treating the water system as an entirety, as a whole, does the same thing. Now, again, it focuses a lot on planning and the capital work, but that's a part of what staff has committed to doing in partnership with the other folks around the table. Also, just kind of want to talk about another recommendation, speaking of being around the table, is actually creating a new committee that would be made up of city representatives and township representatives. It's called the Utility Policy Committee. This is a new board that would meet at least quarterly and to ensure that we have open data sharing between city and township representatives, that everybody has the same information, and that decisions are being communicated openly and to everyone. Based on a lot of discussions back and forth, roles and responsibilities, what's being recommended is that there would be 4 township representatives, 3 city representatives, and then we would all have alternatives or alternates, I'm sorry. A big role of that utility policy committee will be to advise city staff and the city commission, just like we do with a lot of other boards. So that board does have some roles under this new contract. Primarily, they do get to select some of the consultants. They will be involved in the rate making process. But at the end of the day, the Utility Policy Committee and the city staff would bring a recommendation to the city commission, and you all as city commissioners would still have that final authority over any decision regarding the rates. Very similar to like what we do with the Planning Commission or other advisory boards that bring a recommendation to the city commission. I'm going to now turn this over to Director James Baker, who's going to talk a little bit more about how we operate this as a system and kind of what's gone into kind of some of these decisions that we've made here over the last few years. James?
Thank you, Deputy City Manager. Just to focus on the nature of the systems, truly regional in operation. So I'll provide some context to that by detailing some components of the system and then kind of give a visual on what some of that looks like. We have 13 water production stations in operation linked together by over 800 miles of water main, serving 10 water districts in an area of about 150 square miles. Within that, we have 17 additional booster bleeder stations that provide the mechanism to shift water between districts back and forth. So an example that I want to kind of talk through to help us all visualize that is going to be the new water tower on 131. We internally, that's known as the Siesta Water Tower. The name comes from the street that it's actually on, or the access street. I think a lot of folks in the community might refer to that as a Promise Water Tower. It's got the Kalamazoo Promise logo on it. So that water tower serves a water district that's pretty large. That water district spans for everybody in City Kalamazoo that's south of Miller Road. So if you kind of go around the western and southern edge of the city, it picks up all those neighborhoods, including Millwood, South Westnedge, Old Colony, Bronson Boulevard, Westnedge Hill, all the way out and grabs a little bit of Oshimo Township as you head north towards Drake Road. That district expands east through Kalamazoo Township, Comstock Township, and serves a neighborhood that's on the other side of 35th Street. So in terms of I-94, this water district in this one area spans from exit 76, which is 131, all the way past exit 85. So if you were to kind of take a tour of the southern ring of this water district, you got to get on the interstate and go for 9 miles. That's quite a feat. And that's just highlight one area of that. And so within that 800 miles of water main, within an area of 150 square miles, we literally have the ability to produce water at multiple locations. We do that in accordance with what we call a base load, peak load, and then high demand period using those additional booster and bleeder stations to move water around. There really isn't anywhere in the district that's just city water in the city or just township water in the township. Majority of the water is produced in City Kalamazoo, Comstock Township, and Texas Township. And then there's also smaller peaker stations within those areas. And then, of course, we're moving all the water around. I also want to provide a little bit of background in terms of capital reinvestment in a time period that we're in right now in terms of the alignment of capital reinvestment priorities. So we're really at a unique time period in the water system in that we've got age, condition, and performance factors that are really influencing a lot of capital needs within kind of the original city area. And we also have evolving and changing levels of service expectations and regulations that are really system-wide. To go into some more detail on that, we've got lead service line replacements. Not only is that a City Kalamazoo priority, that's something City Kalamazoo committed to back in 2017, but actually this year, 2021, starts compliance with the state law. So even if the city were not deciding to do that, state law requires that. And above that, that's the right thing to do. We know there's no safe level of lead in drinking water, period. Those lead service lines got to come out. We also have cast iron main replacements. We've got about 100 miles of main at this point in time that's over 100 years old. As we look out to the future, to around year 2037, 2040, we add another 300 miles of main to that. Now, I'm not saying that main hits 100 years old and then it's no good, we got to replace it. Really, when we look at age, condition, break history, we're really taking the asset management approach when we're coordinating our MDOT street projects to replace that water main. As it stands right now, looking past the last 5-year period, we average somewhere between 80 and 100 main breaks per year. And, we've been very proactive with cast iron main replacements, and we need to continue to stay proactive with that so that as we get into the future and we're looking out on that horizon, so that as a system, we're able to plan for and deal with those additional replacements that are really going to be focusing on in 20 years from now. And the reason why that's important, one, water main breaks are disruption to the system. They're cause acidic water quality issues. A lot of times you see the boil water advisories come out. Those are precautionary to make sure that we're informing the public and we're making sure everyone's doing what they should safely. Not only that, but it's really a focus of what all of our crews do in public services. If you think about 80 to 100 main breaks per year, that's a tremendous workload. And we're able to sustain that with the crews that we have in place. If those numbers were to grow, if we were to get up to 200 main breaks a year, it would overwhelm this department. At that point, you're really going to start looking at reliability issues and the ability to have water at the tap when you turn the water on. In addition to that, as we're spending more time on main breaks, we're not spending time on our valve program, our hydrant replacement program, and the overall basics of water distribution systems. So really, those capital programs are critical. As we look through other capital programs, again, it's kind of everything coming together at the same time. We've got treatment enhancements planned at all the stations throughout the entire system, really with a focus on optimizing corrosion control and iron sequestration. And then there's a few stations that we're going even further. We're installing treatment to protect from regulated and unregulated contaminants, as well as increasing the number of iron removal stations that we have in the system. As you look out across the system and you get further out, say into the townships, for example, we've got looping and transmission upgrades planned throughout. And then kind of bringing it back to our example with the new water tower, the Promise Water Tower. We'll be doing a project this year, a major looping project that's out in Comstock Township. That's going to loop production station up in Comstock and kind of connects Comstock and Richland back down across the river, back to that southern ring of that district. And what that will enable us to do at that point is start bringing water down that's produced up near Campbell Lake back to that water tower. So you see the system is connected all throughout. It serves a regional approach, and we really need those water production stations all throughout. We need a reliable, redundant way to move water around, and we've got to be proactive on our capital plan to address not only the age and the condition and performance factors, but to stay ahead of regulated, unregulated contaminants and water quality, so that every day we can provide and ensure clean, safe drinking water to our citizens. Thank you.
Thanks, James. Again, as we were talking about this in the contract, a lot of discussion about making sure everybody is getting the service that they need. And so as James just explained, there's a lot of work that gets done in the city, but there's also a lot of work that gets done in the townships. And so, again, that was a factor of the new contract, making sure that we're sitting together, sharing actual plans, and also then developing professional work plans that then can recognize needs and plans. As you can imagine, too, going through a contract, there's a lot of discussion about money, quite frankly. And when it comes down to it, about who's going to pay for what. And so we went through so many discussions to talk about, well, who built this pipe or who built that pipe? And, and they were actually needed discussions. And so I think the staff and everybody was involved in that. But at the end of the day, we came up with a process for setting rates that we believe is fair for everybody. And we also looked at what the trends are for the city and the township going forward. And we also found a way to actually incorporate that language into the contract, so that no matter who's sitting around the table 5 years from now, 10 years from now, there's information to capture what we talked about here recently. So tonight we have Bart Foster, who is our rate consultant. You've seen him at some of our previous budget presentations. And Bart is going to just talk real briefly about how we kind of arrived at those discussions and recommendations as they pertain to rates. Bart.
Thank you, Mr. Chamberlain. And yes, I will be brief, but I do want to provide a bit of historical background. The water rates for Kalamazoo that Kalamazoo is designed for both city residents and township residents and businesses, the general methodology is 40 years old. It goes back to about 1982 and some interpretation of some state requirements. And traditionally, as Jeff alluded to, what would tend to happen would be there'd be efforts to assign costs of dealing with the infrastructure in the townships, not the big stuff that James is talking about, but the individual pipes and meters and service lines, and charge those just to the townships, and then other efforts to charge just the city minor infrastructure to the city residents. That and a combination of who built what and where you were in the life cycle would be investment in specific facilities or programs designed to benefit specific customers, led to an occasion where some years the city rates would go up and the townships would go down, and vice versa. There was an extreme amount of volatility. During the contractual discussions, what both sides were really seeking to do was to try to figure out the best way that the contract language could define how this complex methodology would treat them fairly. As we got towards the final analysis, it became clear that in general, in where we were in the life cycle and with some of the information that Jeff mentioned that came to light through accounting staff participation, it looked like no matter how we carve this thing up on this complicated methodology, the difference between township rates and city rates was not going to be material in the near-term future. And in fact, it could go up and down year over year. Rather than do that, what the parties ended up agreeing to is, look, there are aspects of the current methodology that benefits township customers sometimes, and there are aspects that benefit city customers sometimes in terms of what they end up paying. And let's just eliminate that and make it stable so that everybody's being treated fairly and uniformly, and we take some of the volatility of year-over-year changes out of play. That was accommodated. It should be much simpler. There's no longer the need for the detailed analysis of where costs are being spent in the township versus the city. It's important to still do that, but it won't impact the rates, and it ought to produce much more stable and uniform adjustments going forward. The final notion that I'll mention, and we illustrated it to you when we brought the proposed budget and charges back in February, early February, is we have updated the survey of Kalamazoo water and wastewater rates in like-sized Michigan communities, and the water rates remain near the bottom, even after the adjustments to an equalized rate scenario. And the wastewater rates are at the bottom, so that when you combine the water and wastewater rates for Kalamazoo residents, they are the lowest of any community that we surveyed in Michigan.
Right. Thanks, Bart. So we wanted to just kind of summarize where we are with the contract in that we're bringing it to you tonight at the 7 o'clock meeting with a recommendation for approval. But we wanted to just emphasize again that we saw this as a long-term collaborative effort. But at the same time, we knew that continued legal cases and arguing over water systems is not good for the public at large. We've seen enough examples, and we'll just use ones that we all know, Flint and Parchment, where the basic service of local government is to provide safe drinking water to the public. And so we feel that through this contract, we keep the professionals in charge of the water system and running it on a day-to-day basis like they should. We do it as a partnership. But at the same time, at the end of the day, somebody's name has to be on the permit for the water system for the state of Michigan, and that will remain with the city of Kalamazoo. But we're going to keep working with our township partners and how we do this. We do believe as city staff that actually this is a good contract. It's in the best interest of the city. It protects our assets and it protects the water system for the long term. We did want to just kind of put out there the question of, well, what happens if the contract does not pass? As was mentioned, this was an original lawsuit from 2014. That lawsuit has basically been set aside under what's called a legal term of tolling agreements. But if this contract were not passed, we would probably go back to the lawsuit. And that would start over again in front of a judge. And at that point, kind of the end result, we lose control over. And so I think all the parties were very interested in reaching an agreement on a contract amongst all the municipalities in that it gives us as operators of a water system, customers of a water system, kind of the real seat at the table on how it's being done. So again, we're going to bring this back at the 7 o'clock meeting. We are recommending it be approved. A number of departments were involved in this. As I started at the beginning of the meeting, City Attorney's Office, City Manager's Office, Public Services, and our Management Services Department. And they've all signed off on this contract too. So with that, we wanted to leave time for any questions tonight and be happy to do that. Mayor?
Yeah, thank you so much, DCM Chamberlain. Just a couple quick questions before we start on that. Just a little addition here. How long has Bart Foster, our hired consultant, been involved with helping us set rates here? You have any idea off that? I'm sure Bart knows, but.
My first meeting in Kalamazoo was in May of 1989.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So you got a bit of history with the system then.
Yes.
And James Baker, could you just touch really quickly, what are some of the things now we've been doing? I know we've been, we haven't been doing water shutoffs during this time of COVID. I know you've talked about some other efforts that I'm going to call somewhat parallel to this. relative to concerns about, costs for water and your efforts to, help people be more efficient. Could you speak a little bit about those couple items and maybe anything else related to that?
Yeah, certainly. We recognize that if folks can have challenges with utility bills, first and foremost, we've ceased the practice of doing shutoffs through 2021. And it is our plan to work with staff to bring forward some sort of solution for, here moving on. It might take us some time to get there, but until we figure it out, we're ceasing water shutoffs. In respect to the water bills, if you have an arrears, if you have a bill that's due, we helped over 503 families in 2020 with the COVID assistance funds that were provided from the state of Michigan. We are now partnered with Consumers Energy for a energy and usage sustainability program, and that focuses on helping folks deal with aging plumbing or inefficient fixtures, things that are driving up the usage within the home. We see oftentimes customers that struggle with utility payments are also struggling with usage. There's things happening within the home that are driving those bills up, and this program really seeks to help with that. We're also looking to continue with direct utility assistance as state programs become available. I know our finance director is routinely working on that, looking into county resources as well as state resources. And if something comes up, we will apply that, and that will hold for city residents or township residents as long as you're part of that system.
Thank you, Director Baker.
Thank you.
Yes. Questions, Commissioner Cunningham?
I know you saw me. I just had a real quick question. The makeup of this new body that will be made that will work with the city staff, has there been any information around that and what that'll look like?
That's a good question, Commissioner Cunningham. We have not put forth any specific names. The only criteria in the contract is that the townships and the city need to at least appoint one person that has some knowledge about technical knowledge, such as either engineering or law or rate making, but other representatives can be citizens. And so, as we've had discussions internally, we recognize that we need to have a diverse representation from those who eventually get appointed by the city of Kalamazoo.
Commissioner Pradel?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Just have a couple questions. The first one's a really good tie-on to Commissioner Cunningham's question. So reading through this, and you stated this tonight, so there would be 4 representatives from township municipalities and then 3 from the city of Kalamazoo. Since there are 8 municipal bodies that are part of this, how do those municipalities come to an agreement about which 4 individuals get to represent on that policy committee?
Yeah, I can try to get that also. That is a good question. And in that, we don't prescribe that in the contract itself. It's left up to how the townships want to do that. Through this process, though, there's another group that's representing the townships called the Regional Commission, where the townships meet together for water and sewer type issues. And so a lot of the communications amongst the townships has gone through that. So we don't know this for certain, but it seemed like that body would be as a way for the township officials to determine who their representatives would be.
Okay. And then for the 3 people who represent the city, would those be mayoral appointments similar to other boards and commissions, approved by the city commission, or would it be decided by that policy committee?
Well, they would come before the city commission. The contract just says that appointed by the city. So the intention is to bring forth those names to the city commission.
If there are any residents that are concerned about the fact when you actually look at the numbers and it shows 4 people from outside the city and 3 people from the city, first instinct might be to like, oh, well, that gives a voting majority to people that aren't the city. Do you have any, comments you could share about that just to alleviate any concern about that?
Sure. And we did have obviously a lot of discussions about that. So the new Utility Policy Committee, their primary role is going to work with staff and consultants at being an advisory board. So to review and advise. So we will provide a lot of information, sharing capital plans and things like that. There are a couple areas, I'm sorry, and one of obviously the big one is to review and make recommendations on the rates. But then that comes to the City Commission for final approval. There are a couple areas where we said, there are some legitimate ways for that body to have some authority. One is they're going to have some authority to select consultants. So, but they would then run through the city's purchasing process. So we've kind of got a checks and balance there. They also have the authority to look at how new growth is going to be paid for out in the townships as to whether it's an assessment and how it matches up with the township plans. So the big role is going to be making recommendations to staff and to the City Commission.
So a good way to think about it is that they might have 4 voting members, but we have 3, and ultimately we have the ultimate deciding power as the City Commission is a good way to think of that.
Right.
Okay.
And yeah.
The other thing I was going to ask as well, so this work has gone on for 7 years since 2014. And, there have been consultants involved from various parties, it's gone to court, I mean, is there any idea in terms of how much has been spent either from their end and our end on, legal costs to make that happen throughout that process? I mean, certainly there's probably staff time that you can't, fully gauge that have gone on for 7 years, but is there any sense in terms of actual legal costs that have been accrued by the city or those townships, or even just a rough estimate to give people an idea of the magnitude of how much this is costing to persist?
To Commissioner Fredo, I do not have those numbers tonight. We actually didn't use them in the factors, just except that you're absolutely right. There were at least 2 outside attorneys sitting around the table at these meetings. Mr. Foster, and he had a counterpart as far as a rate consultant that the townships use that we worked with freely. I mean, freely as an exchange of ideas and information back and forth. And the townships also had an outside accountant that, again, we shared information back and forth with our accounting staff. So we do not have, I'm sorry, but we just don't have those numbers, but there were a lot of people besides staff that were involved.
But it's fair to say it's been a lot.
Yes.
Okay. Then the other question, just looking through the packet as well, it looks like all of the other participating municipalities have already signed this and approved it at their boards and commissions as well, correct?
Yes, and in the public packet and for the 7 o'clock agenda packet, resolutions from each of those boards were attached to the draft contract. There's appendices that go with it. And then there were the resolutions from the other communities.
So we're the last signing body. So effectively, once it's approved by us, it is approved. So if we voted to not do this, I just want to make sure that we're all in the public understands this as well. If we were to decide not to do this, we would be effectively unraveling all the approvals of everybody else, correct?
That is correct. We don't have a method for making changes to it. We basically be starting over again.
Okay. And then the last question I just had for you as well, in terms of the actual bodies within our region that have their own water systems, it's my understanding it's Portage, and then is it Galesburg that are the only ones that have their own water systems?
James, James or Bart?
Yes, I can answer that. So as you stated, Commissioner, that is correct. Galesburg has their own water system. Portage has their own water system. Climax has their own water system. And Vicksburg has their own water system, as well as Schoolcraft. So there are other smaller water systems that are within Kalamazoo County. And I'm limiting my response to Kalamazoo County.
If those bodies were at some point were to wish to become part of our wide network system, is there a mechanism within the proposal to expand, or if that should change at all to bring other municipalities into the fold?
So, that's a good point. That's something that the contract specifies steps to go through, essentially that UPC or Utility Policy Committee is a sounding board for recommendations and things like that. Most certainly, if a situation arose similar to Parchment, that would be a discussion, for moving things forward. Generally speaking, water systems don't connect to each other. Parchment was an emergency situation that when that happened, there was a team of engineers from Eagle that came down literally that night to meet with our team of engineers internally, and we were working under an emergency order, both approved at the state level and county level. So decisions to say connect to another municipal water system would take time and go through all the planning and municipal agencies and boards needed to thoroughly vet and consider that.
One last question, then I'll shut up, but I feel like it's a pretty important one. So when the lawsuit started, the lawsuit was on the basis that the townships felt like they were being overcharged over a course of many, many years. So effectively, they had consultants that had calculated amounts within the tens of millions that the townships were overcharged, correct?
Yeah, I can answer that, Commissioner Pradel. That was the allegation.
Right.
And, the city of Kalamazoo was fully prepared to defend that lawsuit against it, and we still are today. But through this process, there were a lot of questions that went back and forth. And we tried to be as open as possible, and, we had some very frank discussions. This contract does not call for the city of Kalamazoo to pay any money to any customers. And that's actually a question as to who is the customer. Is it Mr. and Mrs. Smith who live in one of the townships, or is it the township government per se? And those are legitimate legal questions. So through the process of negotiation, that question of like who owes who what money was in effect set aside.
Right. So effectively, by passage of this, the risk of potentially something going to court and then the court saying that the city's on the hook for overage costs is effectively not an issue, right?
Yeah,
like that risk goes away.
Correct. The lawsuit goes away.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Urban.
I noticed that this item is on the consent agenda. If we're going to have a discussion with Bart Foster and others contributing to it, does it have to come off the consent agenda so this can be discussed? Who's going to take it off the consent agenda?
Any one of us can, so.
Okay. Well, okay. Someone has to do it though, right? Because everybody's prepared this big presentation, so we'll have to hear it all again this evening, which is okay because the public needs to know. But I just want to be clear about what's happening here, so no one gets rocked by something happening unawares.
Good point. This is a public meeting as well, so. Other discussion. I'm sorry, DCM Chamberlain, were you going to say something?
No, I was just going to say that using this new committee of the whole format, we structured it so that you could have more time with staff tonight at the committee of the whole meeting, and then bring it back to you for action.
Okay.
Other discussion on the motion? Commissioner Hess?
It's not really discussion, it's just observations. But ultimately, when you're talking lawsuits, when we're talking issues of trust, this is so much trust that trust of the regional system of our regional partners in the townships and us that maybe wasn't there before. This is also trust in our city administration, in the professionals who work for us. And I saw tonight in Director Baker and our city administration's presentation. So it's our trust as commissioners in the work that the professionals are doing on our behalf. It's also trust in science. It's trust in science. We've asked people to trust science with COVID, but like this is trust in science of how water flows, where water, what the systems are. I know that I am not prepared to sit at a table and barter these agreements, but this is our trust in you and your knowledge of science and economics. And I know, Steve, you've been silent, but I know that you and your team have worked very hard on all of this as well. So it's definitely about trust. And I want to go down on the side of trusting in the people that work for this good city.
Thank you, Commissioner Hess. Other discussion on this? Well, as Commissioner Urban said, we could have further discussion this evening. DCM Chamberlain, did you want to say something else? No? Okay. So that may occur, but I guess just since we're in the midst of this discussion, I just want to make a few points in no particular order, from my perspective. And I start with this, is that, one of the most profound and important services that the city provides is safe water. And for anyone, and that's not just to city residents, that is now to a large number of our regional partners, where you live just across the line in Eastwood or where you live. That is a service that we becomes so second nature to us that we fail to recognize its value and its importance. And for anyone who's had the opportunity or the luxury get to travel a little bit in this world, you find out how rare that is, to be able just to turn on the tap and trust that water to drink right out of the faucet. And that's what we have, that's what we live with. And that's something that is most certainly worth preserving in every way, shape, or form. I think this is just one of the core services we provide, which is like I said, not always recognized, but profoundly important. And with this particular, I will suggest that this action tonight is actually a moment for some celebration and recognition. We have been living a history of mistrust, high emotions, animosity, and challenges with our water contracts for decades and decades and decades. And as was recognized earlier, lawsuits is what ended up transpiring to settle that antagonism and that disagreement, whether it's in the 80s or the 90s. And now we're talking about one that's been going on for 7 long years. And there was some discussion about, well, how much does that cost? Well, it has cost a lot. I mean, well up into the 7 figures, Commissioner Pradel. And in human capital, it's cost a lot also, all the time that we have devoted to this. I think that oftentimes when you run for this office, people ask about, well, why isn't there a regional cooperation? Are you supportive of this idea of regional cooperation? And everybody says yes. But then when it comes down to doing it and how we do it, it seems like over and over again, we've had a very difficult time figuring that out. And when it's come to our water system, we've had a very difficult time. And I recognize that there's people with long experience who've been involved in this, who will have some very, very strong feelings about water rates and about the city owning this system. But the fact of the matter is that at some point, we have had to reach an agreement and turn that agreement into a contract that someone can still read and understand. 35 years from now, when we're all gone from being around, to say, well, this is what we meant by that. And so word by word, comma by comma, capitalization by capitalization, in addition to detailed evaluation about how we're going to calculate rates and how we're going to invest in this system, all is included in this document. And yet, all that work, culmination of 7 years, also creates some fragility in that this is what we have. And do we want to start talking about this all over again? I mean, I think not. I really think that, and actually some people who I respect have accused me of some magical thinking on this. And I'm going to say this is not just trust we're talking about. We are codifying a legal contract. That takes us a bit out of the realm of just trust. You know, this is about a contract, which, you know, trust somebody or not, that's what we've agreed to, you know, years from now. So what I feel like is for this idea of regional collaboration to expand, and I'll suggest there's other areas that we're going to be needing to do this in. Housing, for example. Just this past November, we passed a county-wide housing millage, countywide. So in order to more collaborate as regional partners, this is something we had to get done. And I do believe it's going to set the stage for further trusting conversations and interactions on other topics. So I want to give credit to the core team. Mr. Baker, Director Baker, came in kind of new to the history here, be able to look at it with some new eyes, brought a great deal of expertise to the table. Deputy City Manager Chamberlain just hung with this. Clyde was in there hours and hours and hours, you know, protecting the city's interest on this contract. And longtime experts like our consultant, Bart Foster, who's been doing this work with us for, what, 33 years now, Mr. Foster? So this was not easy, and it was not always happy. And many times through these 7 years, I think we were at a point where we thought, we're not sure we can get this done. So thank you to our city team. Thank you, townships, for hanging in and getting to something that we can all work with. I really, really appreciate that. So I may end up repeating myself depending on the extent of our discussion, our business meeting, but I've had the opportunity here to have a great deal of interaction with our township partners over these 7 years and before. Just the last thing I'll say on this is that issues about water and wastewater were at the front of the agenda and really required a lot of community input when I first ran on the commission in 2005. And I think we've got so many other issues that we have to address. I can't tell you how happy I am personally that we are at this moment, which I often wondered if we could ever get to. So I think it's a good moment. I think tonight's the night. We need to pass that. Everyone else has. You know, this is demonstrating our good faith and our trust in our negotiation team that the technical details and the legal details have been addressed. So thank you for that. I think at this point, there's opportunity for commissioner comment on, I'm sorry, Manager Ritzman.
Yeah, I just a couple of thoughts on this. One, I too want to thank the negotiation team. I know I missed Mr. Baker. He was a critical piece to that, as well as folks in management services. And not to be Debbie Downer, but Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong. We get to do this all over again
Yes,
with
we do.
wastewater. So
Yeah.
hopefully that will not take 7 years. So just to remind everyone that we're back at it again with negotiating with the townships over wastewater.
Thank you, Manager Richmond, for taking a bit of a glow off of it. So with that said, opportunity for commissioner comments, and then of course we're going to be going into our business meeting at 7 o'clock. Any commissioner comments for the good of the order? All right, seeing none, we're adjourned, and we'll see each other again in a half an hour.